You heard just a moment ago the gospel reading from Mark, and those words where Jesus says, watch out or beware. He uses them twice. He uses it here in this chapter and in the next chapter. And he's telling them to beware of certain individuals, the people you might not expect, people who are religious people. And I want to talk to you about that this morning. On the back of your bulletin is the outline of the message. I want to read to you again from Mark's Gospel, chapter 12, verses 38 through 40. Jesus taught and said, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will have the greater condemnation. The title of my message this morning is Beware. I remember one time when I was in North Carolina, back when I was first getting started in the ministry. I was, matter of fact, in North Carolina over a summer. And one of my assignments as a young guy in serving in a church under a pastor was to, anytime a young person came and visited the church, I was supposed to go and try to get in touch with them at their home. So I went out to this house not too far down the road from the church, and there was a fence around it. And there was a sign that says, beware of dog, or beware of dog. You know, you see them, right, all the time. And I looked around and tried to see if I could see a dog, and I didn't see anything around the house. And so I thought, you know, this gate's too far from the door. I can't even ring the doorbell from here. So I raised up the door, the latch to the door of that gate, and I walked up the walkway up to the house, and I rang the doorbell. And there's no answer. I rang it again. There's no answer. Well, I turned to leave, and right staring me at the bottom of the steps was a big Doberman Pinscher. And he just had a low growl. I ran down the porch, jumped off the porch, jumped over the fence, and the dog in hot pursuit. I'm standing here today because I made it. That's a true story. I wish there had been video. Yeah, I'm sure it looked hilarious. I did not heed the warning to beware. Just because I couldn't see a danger didn't mean that the danger was not there. Sometimes the dangers are in the places that we least expect. In this story, the danger comes from religious leaders, where Jesus warns in particular of the scribes, but he applied it to other groups as well. By the time we reach this point in the narrative of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus has begun the last week of his ministry. Now, according to Mark's Gospel, he really only spends that final week in Jerusalem. The rest of the time he's in Galilee and the regions around there, preaching the good news that the kingdom of God was near. Well, in the beginning of that week, a good part of that week is involved in disputes with Jewish religious leaders. The Sadducees, the scribes, the Pharisees who were associated with the Pharisees. The scribes were simply people who thought of themselves as experts in the Jewish Torah, the law, the religious law. And so Jesus has this series of encounters. We talked about one last week where he talked about the great commandment. You recall that? Well, here Jesus turns to his disciples and he says, beware of the scribes. Beware of the so-called Torah experts. And I want to talk to you today about how we need to beware, to watch out, even when we encounter people in religious garb and part of religious institutions. And I think you'll see that today, and you'll see how it still resonates in the world in which we live. But let's reflect on the story for a moment. What does Jesus say? What is he warning his disciples about? Well, as he taught his disciples, he warned them to beware of pretentious religious leaders who elevate their status and enrich themselves at the expense of the most vulnerable. In this case, he picks on the religious scribes of the day. And he specifically makes a charge about them. He says, these people love to walk around in long robes being greeted with respect in the marketplaces, while occupying the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. In other words, they're the kind of people, the kind of religious leaders who use their own status to promote their celebrity. And all the while they're doing it, they're giving a pretension of offering these long prayers and these great sounding words, yet he says they devour widows' houses. Now, we often focus on the latter part of this story about the poor widow who gave all she had, and we often hold her up as an example of sacrificial giving. But don't forget that Jesus introduced the subject of widows not with the woman who gave all she had, but with powerful, high-status, pretentious religious leaders who were using their position and their power and their celebrity to run roughshod over the most vulnerable people in their communities. And Jesus warns about that. He warns that this is an example of self-serving religion, when it becomes more about the promotion of oneself or one's religious institution over helping the people who are most in need. This is a constant theme of Jesus' ministry and his message. He had ongoing conflicts with the religious authorities of the day, in part because he felt they had created a system that was more about status, power, and privilege than it was of empowering the people who most needed it. Now, of course, we know that ended in the first century, right? Clearly it did not. The most shocking and stunning thing about Christian history that I have noticed has been how quickly this movement that Jesus began, which was focused upon the nearness of the kingdom of God and the reversal that kingdom would bring of elevating the people who are most vulnerable and most powerless to a status of flourishing, that the very followers of Jesus in very short order begin to transform it into the run-of-the-mill religious institutions that were more concerned about power, privilege, and status. Certainly it began to happen before this point, but the so-called conversion of Constantine, the Roman general and later emperor, Constantine the Great he's now called, in his effort to make Rome great again, he co-opted the religious powers of his day, who became so enamored with the opportunity that they had not formerly had before of becoming on the inside track and getting close to power and the benefits and the privileges of being near power, that they were willing to totally forget everything that Jesus had not only taught, but what he had modeled in his life. And they did the very same things that Jesus critiques here. They became enamored with their own power, authority, and success. It didn't stop with the proto-Roman Catholic Church either, who became more fascinated with the buildings that tax dollars could raise, or the special clerical garbs and strange hats that the religiously empowered would wear to impress the people who were laity. The sharp divisions between the two. That didn't end then. It still goes on today, doesn't it? Right here in America. Right here in America, we see a lot of high-profile ministries where the preachers preach this prosperity gospel, where they claim to use the message and mission of Jesus to cover over the idea that they're telling people effectively, if you follow me, and especially if you give seed money to me, that seed of faith money, then God will bring back all these blessings to you. And time again, we read of reports of some of the poorest and most vulnerable people giving sacrificially, almost remarkably, to these ministries of these high-profile people, who then turn and use those ministries to build great institutional monuments to themselves, or buy the latest Bentley on the market, or another private jet. That still happens today. We know this, right? people are still taken in. And then when you look at political power, how they all tend to gravitate toward it, and they just, they just seem to want to be around positions of power and elevate their status. We see it. I could name names. Some of you may like, but they still preach this word of faith gospel notion, that's prosperity gospel, that often preys upon the weakest and most vulnerable people. Jesus then, after he critiqued the religious leaders of his day, he turned to watching those who made contributions in the treasury. And apparently these contribution boxes that were there associated with the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, and Jesus kind of stopped to watch what was going on. And so he sits down with his disciples opposite the treasury at the temple to observe the crowds as they put money into the contribution boxes. Now he noted that many rich people put in large sums of money. Out of their abundance, they gave some. But then he particularly noted a widow who gave, the most meager 2 coins, the most meager amount of money, and put it in the contribution box. He says she gave all that she had. She gave away basically her livelihood. And Jesus says she gave more than everyone else. Now you say, how is that so? Because they gave some out of their abundance. She gave all out of her scarcity. Now we put her up as an example. And to be sure, there is something to be said, certainly praiseworthy, that an individual is willing to give sacrificially in a total act of trust and dependent that God would then reward and bless her in return. And we have often, matter of fact, preachers have often used that to encourage people who didn't have much to give what they had to their churches. And I know, and you know, the prosperity preachers have used this story for years to say, give that seed money, give till it hurts, give all you've got, send it into me, and there'll be blessings untold for you. See, Jesus told this story not primarily to give us an example of giving, though I think that's in there. I believe Jesus told this story of the widow because he had just finished saying, look at the pretentious religious leadership who are more concerned about greetings in the marketplace and having the chief seats in the synagogue and being recognized by the powers that be as someone who is important. They're more concerned about those things than they are about poor widows and vulnerable among them, that the scriptures had time and time again said that was to be the chief responsibility of the institutions themselves to care for. No, I think he uses this widow to show how upside down religion can become. He uses this widow to show how corrupt religion can be and how out of sorts it can get. Now, I hope you know, and we've always tried to handle this in a careful way here. We do share with you that the Beacon Hill Fellowship has needs, and we try to keep you up to date on what contributions are coming in. But let me go ahead and give you something that I have tried to say in different ways through the years that I think is very important. If you do not have enough to live on, don't give it to the church. If you're in dire straits and you need to make sure your own livelihood is at stake, we're not asking for your money. We're especially encouraging those who have an abundance to give to support the work of our congregation. But we never want to create a situation like we see here in this story where a religious establishment had so created a system that they pressured people of little to no means to give all they had to fund that ministry. No, we're not trying to do that. We're not trying to be manipulative. We don't want to be that. But I think in this story, Jesus is saying, do not be that way. While Jesus admires the widow's trust in God, he is also offering a critique of a religious system that pressured the poor to give in support of a religious community obsessed with status and wealth. Unfortunately, today, there are charlatans out there. And you need to be aware of them. They're there. Be wary of those out there who tell you that if you give to their ministries or if you just have enough faith, God will bless you with all the luxuries of life that the American dream has to offer. That may work for some people, but it's not what Jesus taught. Jesus taught a very different way. Jesus taught that those who follow him should not be obsessed with, well, especially if you're in leadership, with simply being recognized by the powers that be, or having some seat at the table where you can rub shoulders with those who seem to have it all. No, he encouraged people, just like he modeled in his own life, to mingle among the people and care for their needs and be available for them, and especially keep your eye on the vulnerable and your ear open to their needs and your hands ready to serve and your feet ready to go to those places where there may not be a television camera or a newspaper reporter, where you may not get some special status or privilege from the government or the powers that be. That's what Jesus modeled. You know, when they came to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Eden, they had to have a sign for Judas so that the other guards could know which one was Jesus. Jesus didn't have a halo over his head. He didn't have on a special set of clothes that made him stand apart from the rest of the disciples. He was just like them. He was happy with that. He was okay with that. I wish that there would be more individuals, more religious leaders, more Christian leaders, more churches out there who would become less obsessed with their own buildings and institutions, their own recognition, their own power, their own worldly authority, and more concerned about being among the people and being real and genuine and authentic and trying to empower them to flourish in God's name. There needs to be more like that. Well, one of the ways, and you can help us on this, not for you, but your friends who are so enamored with the so-called word of faith preachers, the prosperity gospelers, don't be taken in by those people. Because your reason why they're so powerful and often so rich is because people give them the money. Don't be taken in by that. Beware. Watch out. They're there.